I love Product Camp. It's so much fun to talk about some of these issues about how do we do things and what are we going to make happen. And as I said, I was literally employee number 17 at the startup. What we're going to do is we're going to talk through what I did when I was at the startup, and it had actually some phenomenal results because I had a really good team, not because I'm smart. And then I'm going to spend maybe 15 minutes kind of blasting through 472 slides. And then I want to open it up and just have a conversation with you about what you can do next, how you can get the benefits from this. So literally, I'm sitting in my boss's office, and he's like, you know, those product management people, they're expensive. We don't want to pay any money for that. You know, could you do this job? I'm thinking, well, I really feel valued when you talk to me like that. And so I said, I think I can figure it out. And so I started looking into product management. Up to this time, I have a degree in computer science, and I had been working with software development, leading software development teams, and managing teams in large companies. Big culture shock to go from a Marriott, 165,000 employees, to being employee number 17. That was a big challenge for me. And so I had a lot to learn and a lot to figure out about corporate culture issues, and then how do we do things differently. And I went to Pragmatic Marketing to go get some training from Pragmatic Marketing, and so that was very helpful to me to have kind of a rules of the road for where to get started. But we did not implement exactly the Pragmatic Marketing framework, and so I'll talk with you about exactly what we did there. Does this sound like a reasonable kind of discussion point? Okay, is there anything that is a kind of a burning question that's coming to your mind about what you'd like to think about getting started with or doing this kind of stuff in your organization? And I'll give you the freedom to ask that question either now or kind of as we go. Feel free to kind of throw an anchor out and stop me, and we'll talk about that. Anybody as we kick off here? Yes?
Were you doing product management as add-on to an existing job that you already had?
Oh, yes.
Sounds, okay.
Oh, absolutely, yes.
Are you going to talk about how you run essentially another project beside your main job?
Yes, we will talk. So the question is, am I going to talk about what did I do besides that? Yes, I was actually responsible for a whole bunch of stuff that was not product management. And in fact, they said to me, the sky's the limit. Tell us what you need. And so I went off and did some research, and I came back and I said, I need 5 FTEs to do this. And they said, ha 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 ha. So yeah, we definitely had some things that we had to work out along those lines.
Tom, quick question
yes.
for you. As you go through it, just your thoughts on if it matters the organizational structure that the product management team reports into.
Where does product management report, and how does that affect product management in the startup? Okay, great. Yes, sir.
And just your background, what products were you managing at this startup? What type of products were they?
Excellent. So it was a SaaS product for telecom companies. What we did was we created analytical tools that allowed them to make more money when you make phone calls. So that was part of, I guess, part of the evil empire then. So when you think about where you get started, here's what I started with. And these are, I think, the key points that I would want to talk about with you guys, the things I'd want to encourage you to think about. Where do I start? First, sell the benefits. Why do we care? At this company, they had some smart guys who had created a really cool product that allowed them to make money. The problem was that they had sold that product and had done pretty well, and in terms of product life cycle, it was getting to the end of product life cycle. And their gut had been brilliant because they had been practitioners, right? They had worked in the field that they were selling to, and so their gut had been really great at helping them understand what features do I want to create and how do I want to put things in the marketplace. But as they had been away from the market in 7 years, things change. Business is different now than it was in 2007, right? So they were less able to figure out what they should put in the product, and they didn't know where to go, and they needed to come up with a new product idea. They had technical things they wanted to do, but that wasn't a product, right? Just because you can do some cool analytics doesn't mean you can actually sell that to a customer who feels a pain point around that. Secondarily, define your scope. Figure out what you're going to do, and more importantly, what you're not going to do. So you might need to add some things to the model, and you might need to subtract some things from the model. This third point around defining your terms, oh my goodness. Let me just tell you, whatever work you do this week, whatever conversations you have with people, be sure that you ask people to define their terms. There's nothing worse for miscommunication than talking to a room full of experts and bringing up some buzzword or some industry term and recognizing that you have one understanding of what that means and they have an entirely different understanding of what that means. So defining your terms. And I mean, when we say product management, what exactly do we mean by that? You know, I can tell you from talking with telecom companies, when they say product management, it's about this much of product management. They're people who are their professional product managers are not really doing all of product management. They're just doing a small portion of it. Then decide what you're not going to do. decide what you're not going to do right now. And it doesn't mean you're never going to do it, but whatever you're going to do, and then the sanity check is really looking at, are we going to be effective at the things we're trying to accomplish? So everybody, I think, got a copy of this today. This is the Pragmatic Marketing Framework. I hope it's current. I haven't updated mine to check recently, but this is what it was back when I was doing that kind of work. And it was, for me, it was extremely helpful to have a box for all kinds of different activities. Because to get to your point about what other things are you doing, and to your point about what's the organizational structure, what we found was there was no way that the product management organization could own 100% of these functions. So what we had to do is figure out a way, if we were going to organizationally distribute these functions across the company, and remember, there were about 20 of us, right? I mean, we're pretty small. So how are we going to do that? So what we did was we went and looked at defining every single one of these boxes. What was our definition for each one of these things? How are we going to do it? What does this mean? And then we said, does this reflect everything that we're going to do? Now, has anybody here actually taken pragmatic marketing training? Okay. It's great stuff, and I would encourage you to look into it. This framework is available. There's a bunch of stuff that's put online that's free. If you don't do anything else, go to their website and look at this, just because it gives you a pathway that might be a good pathway for you. We went through and evaluated what we defined each one of these terms to mean, and then we said, does this represent all the stuff we need to do to be successful? The Pragmatic Marketing Framework does not actually address, for example, software development. They don't have any software development components in their pragmatic marketing piece. So we're a software development company. We had to incorporate that into the things that we were doing. So what we did was we took their framework and we modified it. And what we did was we identified a few things that we wanted to add in here. So we had this like subject matter expert team doing R&D for the product line. And then each color represents a different department or person who was going to own that stuff. Right? What were they going to do with that? And we said, some stuff I could be responsible for, some stuff the person whose title was Director of Product Management was responsible for, some stuff the sales people or the strategy people, and then this one I think is a really interesting one, unknown or other. Because frankly, we weren't doing a whole bunch of stuff that needed to be done if we were going to be successful. So the next step we did as we went through this process was we looked at these pieces and we said, what are we going to do? What's our plan going to be? And this is exactly what we did. So you could do this too. We took each of the areas and we said, here's the area, here's who owns it, here's our definition for what this means, any other notes about it, and then what are we going to do? This was our September to December plan, right? And what we're going to do over the next few months. This is totally grassroots. This is really organic stuff. It's basic stuff. So for our launch plan, for example, we said we have to make sure that Marcom, pricing, demo are all ready. Sales support tools are available as we get ready for the ship date. And what are we going to do for this quarter? We're going to have bi-weekly launch meetings with the leadership team. We're going to talk about what pieces are ready, what's not ready. And essentially what we did was we walked through each one of those areas. So market problems, what does that mean to us? Well, to us it meant become an expert on the market and problems by interviewing customers and potential customers. Look for unsolved, urgent, and pervasive problems for which people will pay for a solution. Right? Because there can be one of the big problems we had in our organization was that we could say, we can give you 5x ROI. If you pay us $100,000, we can give you $500,000. If you give us $1 million, we can give you $5 million in savings. Now our sales guys thought, this ought to be easy. Like, give me the shotgun, I'll go to the barrel and start shooting fish, right? I mean, how hard could this be? And they were tearing their hair out because customers were saying, that's really interesting, but I don't have a $5 million problem. I have a $250 million problem in a different area. So while your problem set is interesting, it's not urgent. It's pervasive, but it's not urgent. And we are not ready to invest time and effort and energy in buying your product because we have these other problems. You've got a leak in the side of the bucket. We've got a big hole on the other side of the bucket. So that's from a market problems perspective, even though we thought we had our finger on the pulse of what was a problem, the problem actually was we had to figure out what would people pay for. Where's the customer pain and what's their priority? And how are we going to do that? We're going to do customer visits and schedule conference calls with influencers to get information. Now, again, this is not rocket science. This is basic stuff, but it was really important for us to say it out loud. And I want to encourage you to be specific, be explicit, and say it out loud. Have these conversations with people. We actually had a number of things, like here on our product portfolio. What does that mean? Manage a group of products and services which meet market needs, assess viability of portfolio and how its components contribute to corporate strategy and distinctive competence. Manage portfolio like a product. The portfolio has a business case, positioning, marketing, etc. What we're going to do? Nothing. Right? We didn't have the cycles to look at that. That was a big problem to solve, but we didn't have the people or the priority to focus on it. So I just want to say, when you decide what you're going to do and what you're not going to do, that's an example of something we chose not to do. And we walked through this for every single area that was on the chart. Now, what was interesting in our process was there were some areas that we had ownership. I was overseeing product management, so all the stuff in purple I had an opportunity to strongly influence. But there were some areas, for example, sales. Sales were going to do what they wanted to do. So buyer personas, no plan. We talked to them about it. We're not interested. Not important to us. Customer acquisition, going from an initial meeting to a demo to a trial to a formal contract. That was our sales process. We're going to focus on our initial meetings. We're going to keep doing what we're doing. We're not buying into your whole idea about how you're going to sell stuff. Lead generations. We're going to continue to do what we're doing. Right? Success stories. Develop case studies and customer examples. Oh, probably nothing.
Tom, was sales a part of your, did you at any point in that process get their buy-in on the product you were proposing and on the problems you were out to solve? Okay.
No. Sales was, their primary role was to tell us how much our products sucked. Because if our products didn't suck, people would buy them. And so it's our fault that they couldn't get the sales because our products sucked. That was a big challenge that we had, frankly, and we really the interesting thing was we used this process to develop a new product. We actually, my team and I went around and visited with customers and prospects, and we had conversations about pain points. And the customers said, we have a problem that's this big, and I had this much budget. Right? Remember I said I needed 5 FTEs, and they said no. So I said, well, I'm kind of screwed because the customer wants this. That's their minimum viable product. All I can deliver is this. We said, well, what's something that you really are struggling with right now? What's an area that you... And so we started talking with them about it, and a lot of conversations were not very productive, didn't really have a clear action plan, but eventually we kind of stumbled onto this one area that if we could help them figure out how to get visibility, because they didn't have any visibility at all. They were guessing about what they should do, and they were getting results that reflected their guessing. But the good news was that for them, they couldn't actually measure their results very well, so... It was, they were confused and didn't know how confused they were. We started developing a product that could give them a bit of visibility, which gave them a bit of predictability. And what was fascinating to me was, even though they swore that they had to have this for their MVP, the customer that we partnered with bought right away, and their buy paid for 100% of our development. So it was, it was so valuable to them that they were willing to buy the product, even though it only did this little teeny sliver of what they said they wanted. And it gave them so much return on investment that it was totally worth it. And we actually took the company from $5 million a year recurring revenue to $7.5 million a year in recurring revenue in 18 months after launch. So I think that's a pretty amazing return for the investments that we made in the company. And it was funny because sales was kicking and screaming the whole way. I mean, they wanted to do what they wanted to do, and they had this kind of idea that if they heard somebody say something at a customer meeting, and that customer did not buy, they would come back to the product people and say, well, if your product only had this other thing, the customer would have bought. And there are many times I said, that's really interesting. What data do you have to support that idea? And they would say, well, we had this meeting with AT&T where, okay, did AT&T say, I will buy if you? Well, they didn't actually say it that way. Well, that's an anecdote, right? Plural anecdote is not data. You need to have some mechanism. Your opinion, while interesting, is not important. I mean, that's the challenge, and that's true for all of us. Yes, sir?
And how do you get them to make their opinion matter? How do you get them involved? Did they become involved?
They really were not involved. It was painful to me. I mean, we actually ended up, what happened was, and you see this happening in product management, that the sales team does not understand your product at all, and they look to the product management team to come do the demos because you understand the product. And that doesn't necessarily work all that well either, because when you're doing sales work, you're not actually doing product management work, and so it's not going to be a win. What we ended up doing, talking about the question of how did I segment my time, I was essentially seconded to sales. I went to a bunch of sales meetings to talk about the problems we were doing in the marketplace and the the sales team did a lot of the work to do the sales. I'm not saying I did all the sales, but what I am saying is without the support of product management, they would not have been able to close the deals they closed because we were there to talk about, we understood the problems. The sales guys were so busy with their golf dates or their phone calls or their meetings or whatever, they weren't engaged with the problems in the marketplace and the customer pain and the customer urgency. That was their big problem, and I couldn't get them to believe that that mattered. So it was very painful for me.
What's the buyer persona? What's that first one? What is that buyer persona?
Buyer persona?
Yeah, is that
Okay, so
the supply chain process? If that's not the end customer.
So who is the buyer, right? Who's the actual economic buyer? Who's the one who's going to make the decision about whether to buy the product or not? Because you frequently have a technical person who's going to look at it and say, this meets my technical requirements, and then they send it over to contracting, and contracting has to make a decision on whether they're going to buy the product. From a product management perspective, buyer persona typically is identifying who your technical customer is, who's the one who's going to identify those requirements. In large organization sales, though, you have really two buyer personas. You've got the functional requirements buyer, and then you have the contracting buyer. And you've got to make sure you meet needs on both sides of that.
And it can get way bigger than that.
Oh, absolutely.
You've got the strategic guy, you got the technical team with their technical lead, you've got procurement, and then I've dealt with GM procurement, and then there's a whole bunch of other hoops.
Right. So yeah, the larger the sale you want to make, the longer the cycle is going to be, and the more people you have to satisfy in the process. But fundamentally, the idea of buyer persona is you say, who is the person who's going to buy my product, and what do they need? How do I get connected with them? How do I understand their pain and their priorities so that I can focus on the things that they need?
So technically, it's like a customer persona.
It is, yeah, and it's funny because the sales guy said we don't care about that. Which I'm thinking, who are you selling to? If you don't know what you're doing.
So before you go forward, so what advice is at the startup phase? So this is some of the larger, conversation. But how would you, or what would you suggest to smaller businesses at startup to make this simplified so that they understand it? Because they're not there, they may not be there yet under dealing with the intricate market. They may just be on the smaller scale.
Sure. Well, I think in any situation, the question is who will pay you? What's the minimum thing that you have to put out there that somebody would pay you to solve? There are a lot of things that are interesting to you as an expert in whatever it is you do, but they're not necessarily interesting to the market. Just like we were talking to the telecom and we said, we can save you 5x, and they said, so what? But it's not. That's 437th on our list. And when we get to there, we'll call you. Right? So you have to figure out who is going to care about your product and who's going to buy. And a lot of times, especially the passionate entrepreneur is going to say, well, but it's obvious. It's obvious. My widget is the best widget ever. Everybody's going to want this. All I have to do is show them the widget, and they'll see immediately, and they'll pull their wallet out, and they'll be dying to buy. And that's just not true. And whoever has the best marketing wins. That's just how it is. And you've got to. I think that's something you almost have to beat people over the head with. I'm sorry. In the Field of Dreams movie, they said if you build it, they will come. They won't. They really won't. So we had our strategy section. What are we going to do? We tried to figure out different things. Here we had best efforts, and that's really what we said. We're going to do the best we can. If we get a chance to get to it, we'll get to it. So we committed to exactly what we were going to do, and then we said we're going to try some other stuff if it works out. And then we said, doesn't work out, doesn't work out. I mean, that's what we're going to do on that. And then, so basically, like here's the customer interfacing group and the technical account managers. None of them reported to me. I didn't have anything other than indirect influence over the work that they did. And so I had to be an advocate to kind of sell the benefits into their organization. I had to ask for their help, but I couldn't make them do anything. So we tried to figure out what we were going to do. We actually did trade shows, but they would say, we don't know. We don't know what we're doing for trade shows. We don't have any plan for that. We talked about technical account management. What is this? And here's some things that you could do, like the technical account manager. What if the technical account manager called up a customer and said, I was looking at your data and I found some things that might be interesting to you. Or what are some problems that our tool doesn't solve for you? That was none of that. Neither of those is a tough question to ask, but for some reason our technical account managers didn't seem to want to be engaged enough to do that. It was hit or miss. Some people were, others were not. And so what the plan was, we're going to continue to train and focus and improve our overall capabilities. Well, okay, that doesn't really tell me you're going to do much, right? You're going to continue to do what you've been doing. Is it working or not working? I don't know. And then we had this category called Other, which we really didn't have any plan. What's our business case? What's our pricing? What's our product performance? Channel training, collateral sales tools, and thought leaders. we had nobody who could own those things. And it was, very much shoot from the hip, seat of the pants kind of stuff. And the value in bringing this up was to highlight for the organization that this was a gap, that this is an area that we ought to be thinking about. And maybe we aren't going to hire a full-time person in each one of those areas, but maybe we ought to say, well, let's have a conversation about it. And what we did was we took this model and we'd come back every quarter and we'd say, okay, the next quarter's coming up. What are we going to do this quarter? And what we found was over time we'd pick up a thing here or there, we'd drop a thing here or there. But for the most part, we began to handle some of those things that we were not handling otherwise. And the conversation takes a very long time. The idea of getting buy-in takes a very long time because the salespeople are busy and the technical account management people are busy and everybody's busy in a startup. And how do we help them get an idea that's a different idea? How do we help them begin to execute on an idea that's a different idea? That's a challenge. So we also put more process in place. We put a new feature request system in because historically it had been Bruce went to go see a customer or a prospect, and the prospect said, hey, I'd really like it if, and that would come back, and all of a sudden that's #1 priority. Go figure that out. Burton, make this happen. And it was really helter-skelter. We couldn't get continuity in our product development because everybody's idea was equal. So we had to put a feature request. A lot of times people would come in and say, we really have to have this. And the product already did it. But people didn't understand the product well enough to be able to, and we'd go, what do you mean you need this? It does that. Oh, it does? I didn't know it did that. Show me how that works. So we had to put a process in where we would track requests, and then we would say, is this really a feature request, or is it actually a support problem, or is it a bug in the product, or whatever it is? And then we would tag that to a specific release, and we put out a roadmap for the things that we were going to do. We defined a workflow for all those tickets. We had 13 steps from reviewed to closed, so we could identify whether a ticket, where was it in the process? Who was going to do something with it? Because somebody walks into a meeting room and says, hey, I was just talking to customer XYZ and the product is awful because it doesn't do blah. Well, nothing is ever going to happen if you don't have a process to capture that information, evaluate it, get the data. Maybe the problem was that the customer didn't understand how the product worked. Maybe the problem was that there was a problem loading the data that the customer was trying to look at, and that got solved the next day and nobody knew about it. So we had to put all those gripes into a more formalized way, and there was a lot of pushback. Hey man, why are you being so, this is so bureaucratic. I mean, we're, nimble, we're a startup. Why are you making our lives so hard? But what we found was we dramatically reduced that funnel of things we were actually supposed to work on because we could push it back out to the customer interfacing group and say, hey, you know what? You really need to do a little more due diligence before you go run to the product people. Because what they would do is they'd run to the developers and say, hey, you need to fix X, and the developer would go do a bunch of homework, and they'd go, you're crazy. The product already does that. So we kind of pushed that responsibility back out of product management, because I will tell you this, if you are not disciplined about pushing things out of product management, you are going to own every single thing in the organization. So you asked about the sales team and their buy-in. I could have pushed to take over sales, and because I had some plan, I think the leadership would have said, okay, we'll let you take over sales too, but I didn't have the cycles to do the stuff I was supposed to be doing. The last thing I needed to do was try and do something else. So what was the outcome? Well, on the positives, we had a shared vision of what we were going to do and what we were not going to do, and I think that was worthwhile. We had repeatable processes, for heaven's sakes, to go from idea to market. I mean, in most startups, you have no repeatable processes, right? People it's all best effort, it's all heroic work, it's not consistent. We defined a set of repeatable, defined processes from idea, oh, it'd be cool if the product did this, to here's the roadmap, here's the release date, here's the feature. Now, if it would be cool, how do you define cool? How much ROI is there going to be for that? How many customers are going to buy? We had the sales guys come in and say, we have to do this. We understand exactly. We have the data to solve the problem, and we know there's a need in the marketplace for this. And I said, how many prospective customers do that particular activity? And the answer was 1. And I said, if we go to the customer and say, we have this capability, will they buy? Well, we think they might. Oh, I'm not doing that feature. I'm not. It's not worth it. There's no, I've got features that I know customers want. I've got things, because I have data. I've actually gone out to the market. I've talked to customers. I've talked to prospects. I've called people up and said, hey, I'm working in this space. Do you have a few minutes to talk to me about some problem that you're having? I'd like to hear what pain you're feeling in your space. We replaced roadmap by gut feel with an actual roadmap. When is it going to be out? I don't know. We'll get to it. We actually had a repeatable process in that. We dramatically increased our sales wins. As I said, we went from $5 million a year in recurring revenue on the old product to $7.5 million in the first 18 months. Rework, oh my gosh, because we had a structured QA process, we forced people to define how's it going to work when you get it out the door. And then we would test for that before we released it to the wild. And, you know, crazy to say, that was needed because we had a ton of rework, and so we became more efficient in the work that we did. We had a series of releases that were launched on schedule. That was so fun, right? I'm going to deliver this on this date, and this on this date, and this on, and we did it over and over and over again. Prior to that, it was, when do you think the next release of that is going to be out? When's Route Watch coming out again? Probably a couple weeks. We're going to get to it. And then, as a product management team, we were very satisfied with the outcome. The development team was pretty happy about it. Better team cohesion. We felt more like a team. We were less a bunch of individuals. And there was a lot less confusion because we said it out loud. If I say it over and over again, but it's important. You need to say it out loud. Much less confusion. Now, that's on the positive side. You know, I like to say sometimes you win, sometimes you learn. So what were some learnings that we had? We did not have any baseline of our current process to understand what it cost us to do things seat of the pants. We had no way of understanding what that was. We did not define the scope clearly about what product management was. What leadership wanted was somebody to project manage getting new features into the product. That's what they really, really wanted. But they didn't want to commit to a discipline of product management. When I would ask them, what data do you have to support your idea, they'd get angry because they didn't have any data. And in the past, their gut had been sufficient, but it was no longer working for them.
Hey, Tom.
Yes?
What kind of systems did you talk about processes and systems? Did you use software to help them gather that data and put it in one place? Or was it more just
we started really, really simple. I mean, we went and wrote up Word documents. I mean, that was, back, I would use Evernote today to do it, but we had customer meetings and we talked about it and we would summarize the key learnings from those customer meetings. And we had one customer that we went to who had been a good customer of ours, and we said, we'd like to do an offering in this space. Would you be willing to help us? And we would offer you early access in the development cycle, and we would give you great pricing if you would work with us. And we traveled all over the U.S. to meet with their teams for, I don't know, 9 or 10 months to work on getting the product out. So all of that was really collecting information. It was a lot of qualitative, not quantitative, because we had very small data sets. We were only selling to 50 potential telecom carriers in the U.S. and pragmatically only about 6, right? So for us, we couldn't use quantitative data nearly as much as qualitative data, but our sales guys didn't have any qualitative data, right? They just had their opinion. I didn't do a very good job of selling the benefits or celebrating the successes. I've looked back on the time that I did that. I should have spent more time to promote the benefits to the organization and then to celebrate those successes with leadership. I was so busy getting the work done, I was excited to see things moving forward. I didn't do a very good job with that. And I didn't share enough of the challenges along the path. If there's one lesson I learned in my career doing tech work, it is I needed to go to my boss more often to talk about the problems I was having at work. In my head, I sort of thought, I'm a smart guy, they hired me to be a smart guy, they hired me to solve problems, and I should be able to figure it out. And fundamentally, it's just not true. What they hired me to do was work with them to solve the problems. And I needed to be more willing to go out and say, I'm really tearing my hair out about this one. This is not working. I don't know what it's going to take to solve this. Because when our team did something amazing, the leadership didn't appreciate it because they just sort of thought, well, you're just doing your job. Right? When we avoided a big landmine, they didn't even know the landmine existed because we didn't tell them, hey, there's a landmine out there. We're trying to make sure we've got some sort of testing out there so it blows up the little testing device. It doesn't actually blow us up. And their perceptions in the organization, it's too much bureaucracy. You're making us do too much stuff. This costs a lot of money. And what's interesting on that one, there were 2 partners in the firm, and one of them had always done his budgeting by his gut. And so he said, I think the next product ought to cost X. That was not based on anything other than his gut. And I went and did analysis of the feature requests that they had asked for and the estimates that the developers had given me and my experience, and I came back and I said, the cost to deliver that is 2X. And he said, that costs too much. I said, well, I don't know what to tell you, the cost is 2X. So we go in the development cycle, and given him the roadmap and the schedule, and we get to the first delivery date of the pre-launch code. So the first stuff I said I could get out the door was on schedule, and it cost X. And he's like, what do you mean? You spent X and you'd only have half the functionality. Right, I told you the other half is coming and it's going to cost this other. Well, that costs too much. Well, I told you what it was going to cost at the beginning. We've done analysis. You said that's too expensive, but it costs what it costs. I don't know what to tell you. We get to another 50% of X, and now he's really angry. Look, you've wasted my money. It's 1.5X. What kind of moron are you? You're costing that's my money you're spending. You're wasting my money. We delivered on time for the 1.5X stuff. We get to 2X. We delivered 100% of the feature set we promised. As I said, customer number one was that beta customer. They paid back 100% of our development costs. It was all in the plan. But he was very angry about it because he felt like it was too expensive. It cost too much money. I failed to win him over. And I think I should have spent more time in the trenches with him talking about the problems we were solving and how it was going to be more expensive. So that, because I understood it was 2X, but he didn't understand it was 2X. And even after we closed that customer that paid him back all of his money, he was still angry because I had wasted all of his money. I should have been able to deliver that on X. So my failure was I didn't sell him on it. I didn't spend the time to have him walking through the process with me so that he could see the estimates, so he could feel the feedback, so he could look at the customer data. I failed. I should have dragged him out to some customer sites. I should have done a better job with that. The other thing he said is you say no too much. Well, if you're going to do product management, you're going to say no a lot. That's your job, to say no a lot. Because do you want to take, and this is something I would say to the folks in my organization, do you want to take 100 ideas one step forward, or do you want to take one idea 100 steps forward? You have to pick, boss. What do you want to do? Now your boss might say, we should be able to walk and chew gum at the same time. Say, no, we can't. We can't. I just tell you that I don't care what your organization is, you can't. So what's the 1, 2, or 3 things you are going to pour your energies into? And if number 4 comes up and it's wonderful, but it's not more valuable, more helpful, more useful than 1, 2, or 3, the answer is no. Not now. And that can go on roadmap. You can say it's going on the roadmap for a year from now or whatever, and it's good to put it on the roadmap, but you got to have those conversations about what's happening.
The other problem you have there, though, is if you've got 100 things, and let's say you get them in the product,
yep,
your sales team is still only going to understand one.
That's true. That's true.
And they won't be able to sell it any better, so the other 98 don't matter anyway. So you're better off to nail that 1 or 2, make it clear and 100%.
That's a really good point.
Sell.
That's a really good point.
On both sides of that one.
Yeah, if I could add to, this concept of the systems that are employed and those kinds of things. I mean, you can use some very sophisticated feature tracking software to categorically assign what you're taking input. But from my experience, what I found is the most important thing is the data that you have to talk about your constituents at organizational boundaries, right? So if you're in product management, you're going to talk with the development teams. If you're in product management, you're going to talk to your sales teams. And you need to have data to protect or to justify your decisions on either side of those boundaries. So from the sales perspective, maybe it is, this is how many hours of development we have, here's our feature backlog, and here's how the business has decided to prioritize that. You're asking me to horse trade with you this feature for that feature. Where does it land? Where does it stack rank? Do you think that it's more important than the top 5 features that are coming in the next release, and if so, why? Right, like Tom said, you have a customer willing to pay for it, show me the contract, show me the SOW, right? And the
sales team gets mad when you start talking like that, right? Because
the same thing on your development team side, because developers estimate work, right? But the art is, if you just take your development team and you carve out and you say, look, you've got 1,800 to 23 hours of man effort per person on your team. If I look at that and I look at what you've estimated for the upcoming release, I'm getting a third of them. Why? Right? And those are always difficult conversations to have because there's overhead, there's vacations, there's meetings, you know what I mean? But you really need to work with the organizational boundaries like development teams to understand what you're really getting for your spend, and it can be as simple as a Word document or Excel spreadsheet, but you need to track it over a period of time so you have that historic data. I think that's where some of the discipline in product management really starts to become visible in an organization.
You bring up a good point. One of the things that I did, because the leadership said to me, "You're taking too long," I went back and looked at our previous release schedule. And what we had done, we did have a ticketing system in place. It was fairly rudimentary for the previous versions of the software that we had developed. But what I did was I looked at our pace of development. How long between releases, how many features went into that release. And when the boss would say to me, this is taking too long, it's too slow, what I did was I went back and said, all right, let's look at what we've done before. Our pace before has been X. I forecasted our future delivery on our prior performance. If you're telling me that we're too slow, it wasn't faster back in the day, right? Here's the data based on when you ran the shop. It's an uncomfortable conversation to have, but you got the first job of a leader is to define reality. Your job is to be real and have a real conversation with your people about what is reality. The reality is we're going to deliver at this pace. We get 3 major features in every release. That's what we do. We've done it that way for 3 years. We cannot do faster than that unless you want to talk about rebuilding in your software development space. Oh, don't mess with our software developers because they got their systems and processes and we got don't know. Okay. If you're not willing to blow that up and redesign that, you have savers?
Shouldn't part of the conversation be, though, if you go back and see, he says it's 1x, you say it's 2x,
right?
Then shouldn't part of the conversation between sales, product development, product management, and actual implementation development be, well, if you want that, it's 2x. Well, I could give you this for 1.5x. And,
yeah.
and here's the other 5 features. Here's what they're going to cost. And I like to break it out into bronze, silver, gold plans.
Right.
Which one can you still sell, minimum product, and now pick and choose, and that's where some of the horse trading is, right?
There's a lot of value in that. The challenge is that, and this goes back to my failure to get buy-in at the level that I needed to get buy-in, because they didn't understand how complex it was, and they said, well, yeah, that estimate says it's 6 months, but it's 2 months. You know, well, if you're not going to fundamentally believe the estimates, then why are we having this conversation? Why do we do estimates? You know, yeah, it's speculative, yeah, and maybe they'll be lucky and maybe they'll figure something out, but maybe they won't. And so I think part of the challenge was when I knew it was 2x, I should have had a series of meetings with the boss to walk him through how did I get to 2x, because I didn't make that up. I had a process that I used to follow that, and he didn't like my process, but okay, boss, if my process is terrible, okay, show me what I'm doing wrong. Which part of my process? That's where I failed, because I just said, look, you hired me because I'm smart. I'm doing this work. Trust me.
Well, that's the other part. From an HR standpoint, some of my background, I don't know that you could have changed the dynamic even if you had done all of that, because some of that is the person's openness to be open to change.
Yes.
In your way of doing things.
Yes.
So I don't know that that was a teachable moment for you. I think it was a teachable moment for the other person of what they could have done differently had they been open to that conversation.
I agree with you on that, because people, if they're not open to change, you can't. I mean, it's enough. We all have enough trouble losing weight that the idea of changing somebody else's behavior. I can't change my behavior. How am I going to change somebody else's? But I think what I could have done organizationally is I could have met with his partner and talked about it. I could have seeded those ideas inside that guy's organization about being able to have the conversation with the boss about here's some problems that we're having. I could have done more advocacy internally, and I was so busy doing the work, and I thought I had my marching orders and I was driving ahead, and we were having a lot of fun because it was working. That was the cool part. It was actually working. So anyway, it was a
I think some of that too is organizational personality, right? Is it an open, collaborative, or one team with one goal line? Or is it 3 divisions with 3 different goal lines, not all aligned?
That's right.
And he's got a different goal.
It all starts with the customer, because you don't have a business without a customer. So the customer should be the focus for everybody's conversation, be it technology, be it sales, be it leadership, whatever. It's like the first thing you need to do is who's your customer, what do they want, your data points to support that, like how many customers do you have, what's the key feature for them, and then like having a product plan that just documents it. You know, the first thing is just like, this is what our customer segment looks like, make sure every...
Yeah, but we had trouble with buy-in on that level. I mean, it's astonishing to me, as having worked in a lot of businesses over my career, it's astonishing to me how few customers actually pay attention to their customers. I mean, you know,
and I guess that would be an opportunity to just make sure, educate the business and spend more time looking at your customer base, because if the business doesn't understand the customers, I mean, you're always going to be spinning your wheels,
Yeah, and I think
because even making the product feature decision, I mean, that's all based on what does that customer need. So if you don't know what your customer looks like, you can't make sure you're delivering the right features.
You're preaching to the choir. I mean, it's, you know, we definitely fought that battle, and I think sometimes you're not going to win, and sometimes the answer is it's time to look for another opportunity. And I just want to let you know, if your value system and the value system, I worked for a company one time that hated their customers, hated, loathed, you know, just contempt toward their customers. Fundamentally, I love customers because I get to eat because I have customers. I think customers are great. I had to leave that organization because there was so much of a values conflict. So I think, you know, we're going to look at your values and the organizational values. Yes, sir.
So Tom, you've obviously learned a lot about product management through
Yes.
that experience. What were you originally hired to do?
That's a great question. I had got 5 minutes. Okay, terrific. I was brought in to run the software development team. And it's funny because that company, I got fired twice. And I actually never missed a paycheck. But what they did was they took 100% of my responsibilities away from me 2 separate times in the 3 years I worked for them. Because I came in and I started looking at the software development organization, and it was broken, and it was dysfunctional, and it was wrapped around the whims of one of the owners who had hired me. He said, I can't do this. I've taken this as far as I can take it. I have big problems in here. I need you to come in and fix this. And so I came in and I said, okay, here's what I would do. Hiro, great guy, smart guy, hardworking guy. He's not the right guy to be your lead developer. He's passionate, he's committed to this organization, but he is not the right guy to be your lead developer. What you need to do is put him over top of all of operations, because he loves operations. And anytime any operational issue comes up, he drops development and he runs over and does operations. He would love to be your operations guy, and let him do that. Oh, but Hiro, I mean, he wrote the first code that we used, and he did a great job, and he's always been there for me. And every time I've ever had a problem I needed to solve, I could go to Hiro, and he would drop what he was doing immediately and run right over and do that. So I started talking about reorganizing and moving operational functions out of software development and into its own operational discipline, and segmenting and being able to predict what availability would be on the software development side so we could actually deliver software on schedule. And it was very painful. And so he said, I don't want you to do that anymore. I don't want you to be in charge of software development. And so I went, okay, fine. And so I had no job for about 2 weeks. I had nothing to do. I'd sit in my office with nothing to do. And then he says, well, how about you take over our IT department and you help our IT, and with that operations thing, we could use some help there. So why don't you do some operations stuff? And so I did IT and operations for about 1.5 years. And I was doing that when they came to me and asked me to do the product management stuff. And I had to add 2, so IT and operations and product management that I was overseeing. And I did that until the owner got mad about the 2X thing, and he fired me from that. And the other owner said, Tom, I really don't want you to leave. You're doing such good work here. I'll make up a job for you.
But now you really understand that company.
Yeah, well, and the funny thing is, I mean, good for the owners. I have no animus toward them in any way, shape, or form. I left that organization, and 6 months later, they got acquired by an international firm, and those guys cashed out in a big way, and good for them. I'm happy for them. Their recurring revenue went from $5 million to $7.5 million. The valuation of the company just went up dramatically, right? So they walked away with a big payday because I had those battles with them. But I'm happy for them. I really am. And I learned a lot. I like to say experience is what you get when you did not get what you wanted. I got a lot of experience. So, well, I think that's our time. So, thanks, guys. Good session.